We know that one of the most central and utilized books in all of Torah and in Jewish life is the book of Tehillim, the book of Psalms. Whenever we need guidance, whenever we need to connect, we take out that book of Tehillim, that book of Psalms, and we just read and we connect to King David and to his emotions and to his passions and to his prayers. In fact, there's this beautiful prayer that we say when we recite the book of Tehillim, that even if we don't have the proper concentrations and we don't understand the meaning, but by reciting these words, King David himself up in heaven takes our words and presents it before God Almighty on our behalf with all of the proper thoughts. And King David, when he opens the book of Tehillim, in the very, very first chapter of the book of Psalm, he writes as follows: Ashrei ha'ish, happy and fortunate is the man who has not walked in the counsel of the wicked, nor stood in the path of sinners. Uvemoshav leitzim lo yashav, and who has not sat in the company of scoffers, of the mockers, of the cynics. So right when King David begins this very powerful book, he's telling us, be weary of the cynics. Be weary of a culture of cynicism. What is cynicism? Well, according to the dictionary, it's the state of being distrustful, of being scornful, of being disparaging of the motives and the virtues of others. A cynic is one who is generally pessimistic, sarcastic, and sarcastic about virtually everything. A cynic is one who knocks and mocks and denigrates and shows contempt for accepted standards of honesty and morality. A cynic is one who seeks out and points out the faults in people and institutions and traditions and ideas. I don't think we can escape the realization that we are living in some very cynical times. It's like reality has become one big parody of itself. You turn on the news or the news talk shows, whether it's on the domestic front, international front, and you feel like you need a shower afterwards. There is such anger. There is such animosity. There is such contentiousness. There's such distrust and sarcasm and viciousness. And the manipulation is enough to turn anyone into a cynic. Some of you may remember, if you follow politics, back in 1988, there was a vice presidential debate. The two candidates were Dan Quayle and Lloyd Bentsen. And the candidate Dan Quayle was being questioned as to whether a 41-year-old first-term senator had the maturity and the experience to be a vice president. Quayle responded that he had just as much experience as Jack Kennedy did when he sought the presidency. To which the Democratic nominee, Senator Lloyd Bentsen, quipped, if you remember. He said, "Senator, I served with Jack Kennedy. I knew Jack Kennedy. Jack Kennedy was a friend of mine." And then staring at Dan Quayle with this right time long pause. "Senator, you're no Jack Kennedy." And the room exploded. And that was the headlines. That was all anyone talked about. It was one line in a 90-minute debate, but it didn't make a difference what happened in the other 89 minutes. He was toast. He ended up winning and becoming vice president. But he will always be remembered for that one moment in that one debate. "Senator, you're no Jack Kennedy." One zinger, one sharp line of ridicule and mockery, and his entire persona and reputation would have been destroyed. One line. Well, if things were cynical 30 years ago, what can be said about today? At least then there was a touch of some style, there was some sophistication to the gotcha moment. Today, it's just downright insults. You don't need the drama with it. It's just straight out, let's insult you. It's become so coarse It's beyond distasteful. The insults, the desire to hurt, to denigrate, to humiliate people on the other side of an argument. So you can say, it's just politics, what do you want? It's a blood sport. If only it were so. The truth is, I'm not sure if the behavior of some politicians is a reflection of what's going on in the rest of society, or it's the other way around. But the bottom line is that cynical attitudes have reached a tipping point all across our society. Whether it's on the college campuses, on television, in the movies, in commerce, in advertising. Wherever you turn, there's a tendency to mock and to scorn and to find the hairline crack in anything once regarded as sacred, as important. It's sad. It's sad to see how people, especially our young people, are becoming such hardened cynics. The more something sounds virtuous, the more something sounds noble or idealistic or wholesome or lofty, the greater the compulsion in society to tear it down. Any discussion of God, any discussion of country, of family, of Bible, of religion, of values, is met with scorn until it's totally deflated and left devoid of any meaning whatsoever. We're living in the age of Facebook and Twitter and YouTube. Anyone with an iPad or a smartphone, I'm not just talking about the tweeter-in-chief, anyone can push a few buttons and post whatever they want about anything or anyone. And the most surefire way of getting 1 million hits is to be as mocking, as shocking, and as mean-spirited as possible. You see, untempered cynicism is a toxic thing. It's destructive. It's poisonous. It's a slippery slope that leads people into the abyss, to believing that nothing in this world is worth anything. And at the end of the day, cynics are not happy people. The greater the cynicism, the smaller the happiness, the darker the outlook, the dimmer the light. So we need to safeguard ourselves and our families from this very slippery slope. Once again, I turn to King David to help us. King David writes, Or zarua la tzadik uli yishrei leiv simcha. Life is planted for the righteous and happiness for the upright of heart. He calls it the upright of heart, and he calls it those will enjoy the blessings of happiness in life. And the commentaries explain, who is King David talking about? What does he mean as the upright of heart? And this is what the commentaries say King David is talking about. People whose hearts are filled with explanations. I thought about that. What does that mean? Filled with explanations. People who are inclined to explain away things that may appear negative. They are explainers and not complainers. Explainers are really the opposite of the cynic. So here's the question to ask ourselves. Are we an explainer or a complainer? Are we a cynic, or do we look for the goodness and the blessings? Are we a fault finder, or are we looking for the virtues of others? The Medrash describes the Jewish people at the shores of the sea with the Egyptians in hot pursuit. God works an incredible miracle, and the sea split. It leaves a pathway for the Jewish people to go through. The Egyptians are stuck on the other side. Many of the Israelites broke out in joyous song praises to God. We repeat that song, Az Yashir Moshe B'nai Yisrael, every day in our prayers. But the Medrash also tells us that there was a group, a small group, but a group nevertheless, that was very upset. Why were they upset? So the Medrash tells us that they were complaining. Why were they complaining? Because they got mud on their shoes. Got mud on our shoes. These were brand new shoes. Before we left Egypt, we were told to go to each of the neighbors and take all the things that we wanted. We picked shoes. We're wearing new shoes. The first time in 210 years that we have a new pair of shoes. They're all muddy. They're all muddy. You made us walk through the mud. God just split the sea for them. But they got mud on their shoes, so they have something to complain about. Are we complainers? Are we cynics? Are we explainers? My goodness, God just split the sea for us. Our Egyptian taskmasters are no more. There's a story told about Rabbi Eliezer Silver, who after the Second World War, after the Holocaust, was very active in bringing Holocaust survivors out of Europe to America. On one of his visits to a displaced person camp in 1946, he met a man who suffered in the camp for years. And the man says to Rabbi Silver, Rabbi, I want you to know that I will never again pray in my life. I'll never pray again. For as long as I live, I'll never pick up a prayer book or do anything religious for that matter. So Rabbi Silver is expecting to hear the usual. How could God have done such a thing? How could God have allowed 6 million? The difficult question that none of us will ever have an answer for. But that's not what the man said. This was his explanation why he will never pick up a siddur again. He said, because when I was in the camp, there was a Jew among us who managed to smuggle in a siddur, a prayer book. So did he let others use it? Did he let others pray for it? Only if they paid him. If they paid him half a day ration of their food. That was his price. Can you imagine? Anyone who wanted to pray would have to give up half their ration of food. We were starving as it was. And to give up half of that food was tremendous. That's what he asked of people. In order to use a siddur, what an outrage. This man was running a business taking rations from starving men. So I decided, if that's what a religious Jew is like, I want no part of it. So Rabbi Silver smiled and shook his head. He said, I don't understand you. I don't understand you. Why do you look at the man that rented out the siddur? Why don't you look at the people who gave up half a day rations of bread for the privilege of holding a siddur in their hand for a few minutes? Focus on them, not the one person who turned you off. The dozens who waited online to have a siddur and connect to God. Let that be an inspiration for you. Let that inspire you to pick up a siddur on your own. You see, it's not always easy to focus on the better angels of human nature, especially when there's so much of the other stuff around us. But folks, it's the only way to go. Life under the best of circumstances is filled with disappointments. All people, even our close friends, even our family members are likely to disappoint us once in a while. Our level of happiness is determined by how we deal with those disappointments. If we can explain them away, we can be happy. But if we complain and we dwell on it and dwell on it and dwell on the negativity and the disappointments and we carry it with us one day, another day, a week, a month, a year, a lifetime, then we're doomed to be miserable ourselves. Complainers harp on the mistakes of their friends and they lose friendships in the process. They're left alone to stew in their cynicism. And that's not a formula for happiness. Everyone wants to be friends with an explainer. No one wants to be friends with a complainer. There was a rabbi in Florida who tells a story that he was once invited to a beautiful wedding. The chuppah was held on the beachfront, and while the sun was setting, it was breathtaking. And then it was time to go into this beautiful hotel for the reception. So he looks at his place card. He finds his assigned table. And when he got there, he was surprised to discover that he was seated at a table with the groom's young friends. He's never met these guys before, a bunch of wild kids. He looks around the ballroom, and there's another table with all the rabbis of the community there. But he wasn't seated there. There's another table with all the respected community leaders. He wasn't there. He was put with the groom's friends. And he tried to make the best of it. He tried to make conversation with the guys on the table, but he couldn't get this out of their head. Why don't they like me? What did I ever do to them? If I would have known that they would put me here, I would never have come to the wedding in the first place. And the entire wedding, that's all he's busy doing. Why'd they put me here? How come I'm not with that rabbi? How come I'm not with that rabbi? Why do they like those rabbis more than me? And that's all he did. He was offended. The party ended. He headed to the valet to retrieve his car. He reaches into his suit pocket for the valet ticket. And that's when it all came crashing down on him. Because in his pocket there were 2 place cards that looked exactly alike, with identical calligraphy. He had in fact been assigned to sit at the rabbi's table. However, a place card from a wedding he had gone to a week before was still in his pocket. And so he went to the wrong table. He was supposed to sit at the rabbi's table, but the shlemazel forgot to throw out last week's card. He went to the wrong table. He spent an entire wedding miserable as to why they don't like me. Why don't they like me? Why am I sitting there? And the truth of the matter is, it was all him. It had nothing to do with the host. They say when you point the finger at someone else, there's 3 fingers pointing right back at you. Before you examine and judge others, examine yourself. The rabbi was pointing the finger the whole time at his host for sitting him in the wrong place, when the blame was really always with him. So let's not jump to conclusions. Let's cut people some slack. Let's give them the benefit of the doubt. Nobody is perfect. Everyone has flaws. Everyone has deficiencies. Let's try to see the best in everyone. Let's stop looking for the worst. Try to find an explanation for their behavior. Don't look for the evidence against them. They didn't email you or text you or call you back right away. Maybe your email got stuck in spam. Maybe they got tied up and they forgot. Maybe it's not as personal as you think. They didn't come to your party. Maybe something was going on in their lives that day. They didn't come to a Shiva call. Do we really know what was happening in their lives? Everyone has different times of crisis in their lives. Maybe they were going through something. We can find a reasonable way to explain other people's behavior if we choose to do so. You see, our nature is immediately to get defensive. There's something about them that's wrong. There's something about them, they did harm to me. That's the cynic within us. We have to build this explainer with us. This is what King David is challenging and saying, those will be the happy people. So let's be explainers. Because explainers keep relationships and complainers don't. Explainers are enriched by other people. Complainers aren't. Our sages tell it to us this way, have he done this kala adam l'kafschus, judge every person favorably. And the operative word is the word kol, which means entirely. In other words, look at the entire person, including his finest qualities. Look at the person's whole history rather than concentrating on one isolated negative incident alone. That's what King David means when he says the upright of heart. To have an explaining heart, it means don't be cynical about your fellow man. Don't rush to judgment, especially when you don't know the full story. Those of us that went as children to sleepaway camp remember visiting day. Visiting day is that one day, sometimes some summer camps, 2 days, where our parents were able to come and visit us either on the campsite, off campsite. It was just that moment during the summer to once again feel connected to home. And for parents, it's also a powerful day. We get to see our kid, who we miss very, very much. So a number of years ago at a Jewish camp in the Catskills, on visiting day, this big white stretch limousine with tinted windows drives onto the campgrounds. Not a common sight. The limo is driving its way around the camp roads. Everyone is looking at this magnificent car, glistening in the sunlight. There were signs posted all over the camp. This is where cars can travel, and this is the parts of camp cars can't travel. This stretch limo just drives right across the lawn, going right up to the bunkhouses. It stays parked there for a while. The limo driver, after 10 minutes, hops back into the car, turns it around, gets off the area where the bunks are, back onto the road. Wherever he wants to go, he's going. In the meantime, all the other campers and all the visiting parents, they're all looking at this car making its maneuvers. And you hear the talking going on. Some people really like to flaunt it, huh? You see, when you have money, you don't have to follow the rules. You could do whatever you want. But it was only a few days later that the story of the limousine's strange driving pattern on visiting day came to light. You see, during the week before, the camp administration had been notified that the father of 2 of their campers was terminally ill, and he had very little time left to live. And he desperately wanted to see his children, but he didn't want their camp time disrupted. For him to come to camp in a standard car would have been impossible. The 2.5-hour trip from Brooklyn to the Catskills would have caused painful spasms throughout his body. So his friends gathered together and they arranged for a special limousine to be outfitted just for the day, with a bed, with a nurse inside the car so he can see his children on visiting day, perhaps even for the last time. When the limousine drove into the camp, the excited brothers wanted to show their father the bunkhouse. Come see our bunkhouse, come see our bunkhouse. But he was too weak to even get out of the car. So the chauffeur driver, rightfully so, didn't ask questions. He just drove the car right up to the bunkhouse so that the father can see their children's bunk and excite the kids that their father is seeing it. And the children went into the car with their dad. They went to a local bungalow colony and spent some quality hours with their father. My friends, let's not assume that we know what's going on behind other people's tinted windows. It's so easy to judge until we know kol ha'adam, all the facts. Let's reserve judgment and criticism until we know the full picture. So let's give both God and man the benefit of the doubt. The Talmud says that a person should always be in the habit of saying that all that God does is for the best. And the Talmud says, be in the habit of saying, Gam zu l'tova. This is also for the best. Why does the Talmud mean be in the habit of saying it? The Talmud understands that it's a difficult thing to say when things are really tough. When you're going through tough times, to say, Gam zu l'tova, this is also for the good, it's hard. It takes emunah, it takes betachon, it takes faith, it takes trust. So the Talmud says, start with the small things in life. So you're putting some margarine or butter on your piece of bread and it slips out of your hand and it falls on the floor and you know which way it's going to fall, right? The initial reaction is to say, oh, something, which I won't say because we're being recorded. Say Gam zu l'tova. It's just a piece of bread. You get stuck in traffic and you're going to be late to an appointment. You know what you want to say. Stop. Gam zu l'tova, this is also for the good. Now let's take it up a notch. Because you got stuck in traffic, you missed your flight. And there's not going to be another flight till the next day. You know what you would want to say. Stop. Gam zu l'tova, this is also for the good. Get into the habit of doing it on smaller things so that it becomes easier to do it when it comes to the storm, when it comes to the difficult things. Gam zu l'tova. I don't know why this happened, but he does. God does. And he has a reason. Here's a story I love so much. It was a hot day in the city of Bnei Brak, one of Israel's most densely populated cities. Scores of people are waiting at the bus stop for the 402 express bus to Jerusalem. As time went on, the crowd began to swell. Amongst the crowd, there's senior citizens kvetching and complaining. There's parents with children that are nagging. There's crying babies, all waiting not too patiently, if you know B'nai Brak, for this bus to come. They're mumbling in Yiddish, they're mumbling in Hebrew. Where's the bus? Where's the bus? Why do we have to wait so long for the bus? It seemed like an eternity, and finally this Egged bus can be spotted in the distance. Thank God, Baruch Hashem, finally the bus is coming. But as the bus came closer, that relief turned to great dismay as they see the number on the bus is the 318 bus heading for Rehovot. They need the 402 to Jerusalem. That's what they've been waiting for. What are you sending a 318 bus here? The poor driver pulls up at the bus and everyone is saying, what? We don't want the 318, we need the 402. And the bus driver, what do you want from him? He's the driver of the 318. And one lady who had an ability to open her mouth a little bit said, look at the people, look at the faces of the senior citizens, stop making them wait, take us to Jerusalem. And he said, I don't write the rules, I'm the 318, I'm not the 402. And she said, look at the babies, it's hot, look at the babies. And the poor driver couldn't take it anymore. And he said, you know what? That's it. We're going to Jerusalem. We're now the 402. Everybody that needs to go to Jerusalem, get on the bus. Wow. He gets and he starts changing the thing on the top of the bus that changes it from the 318 to the 402. Everyone getting on the bus is praising this driver. Wow, you're Mashiach himself. You're the greatest guy in the world. Wow, unbelievable tzaddik that you are. May you prosper greatly. May your children become leaders amongst Israel. May you live a long, happy, healthy life. Every single person getting on this bus, bless this man. This bus now pulls away with the maximum amount of passengers, everyone hanging from the rafters, so to say. One gentleman goes up and says, can I use your microphone, please? And he says, sure, go ahead. He gets to the mic and he gets into this masterful speech about, you don't ever meet a man like this. You don't ever meet a man like this, a giant of a man, a person of such character. We all owe him tremendous gratitude. And they start clapping and applauding for this driver. It was the best day of his life. He pulls up to the main bus station in Jerusalem. Everyone gets off the bus. One guy left on the bus. And as he's going off, he says to the driver, if you don't mind, I have to ask you a question. You know you're going to get fired. You know, it was a big mitzvah. It was a very big mitzvah. I understand. But you're going to get fired. You're going to lose your job for this. You can't just decide. You're the 402. The driver looks around. No one else is here. He says, okay. Between us, let me tell you what happened. You see, back at the bus depot, we have cameras on the busier bus stops. And at some point, my supervisor saw the huge crowd waiting in B'nai Brak and it turning into this mob. And my supervisor yells out, all right, who wants to do the 402 Jerusalem run from B'nai Brak to Jerusalem? My friend David says, oh, no, not me. You're not sending me again. Oh, last time I did that run, I got cursed out by those cranky people. Shimon goes and says, no, the abuse that I take on that run, I'm not doing it today. Not me. Every driver had an excuse why I'm not doing the 402 run from B'nai Brak to Jerusalem. I said, I'll take it. You watch. Let me take it. I'll get these people to love me. They said, these people don't love. Trust me, they don't love. I got on the bus. I changed it from the 402 to the 318. And it worked like a charm. They had no idea that I was always supposed to be the 402. I got more blessings today than I did on my bar mitzvah. Now think about it. It's the exact same set of circumstances. It could generate blessings or anger. It's the same bus. It's the same driver. Everything's exactly the same in regards to circumstances. One thing is different. The thought. They thought that this man did a kindness for them. And that was it. They were in a good mood instead of a cranky mood during the entire bus trip. So how do we contend with cynicism out there in the world? First of all, by carving out a place of gratitude and thankfulness in our lives. We have to find that place where we always show appreciation. You know, many of our parents and grandparents had much harder lives than we do. Some barely survived Europe. Some lived through the Great Depression. Many of them didn't have much money, yet somehow they had a positive outlook on life. Yet many of us whose lives are so much more secure and so much more affluent keep clambering up that slippery slope of cynicism. Why? Perhaps it's because our parents and our grandparents were happy and grateful just to be alive. Just to have a roof over their head brought happiness to them. For thousands of years, Jews have the tradition of waking up each morning with the prayer, Moda Ani. It's great to be alive. To be a conscious, thinking, feeling being is an awesome thrill. Unfortunately, we only seem to appreciate the deep pleasure when we're faced with the possibility of losing it, God forbid. Like when we have a serious health scare. At that point, a very different prayer comes to our lips. If only I can have another regular, normal, boring day of life, I'll never complain again. We shouldn't wait for a crisis to appreciate what we have now. And it wouldn't hurt those passengers in Bnei Brak to say thank you to a bus driver, even if he's just driving his regular route. You know, people often ask, why are Chabad people so enamored with the Lubavitcher Rebbe? What was it about him that drew you to him so strongly and continues to do so to this day, decades after his passing? And there are, of course, so many answers to that question. But for one thing, the Rebbe always projected this incredible aura of authenticity, of sincerity, of humility, of piety, of dignity, of optimism, and idealism. In other words, the Rebbe was the very antithesis of cynicism. And that always shone through, and still does today through his writings, his teachings, the videos of his talks. The Rebbe survived the Holocaust. He lived through dark and cynical times, and yet when he looked at the world, the Rebbe saw beauty. The Rebbe saw the building blocks of redemption. The Rebbe looked at a Jew and saw the shining diamond within that soul. He saw people not just for who they are today, but who they can be tomorrow. He wanted nothing and asked for nothing from them, only that they do a mitzvah. If cynicism, if extreme cynicism says nothing is sacred, the Rebbe's essential message was everything is sacred. He had an enlightened view of the world and of the human condition. The Rebbe wasn't naive. He was every bit the pragmatist and the realist. He saw things exactly for what they were, and yet it was from that place of reality that the Rebbe saw evil as the facade and goodness as the true dynamics and essence of the universe. When you stood in the Rebbe's presence, you saw it. You knew it. You felt it. You knew this is real. This is sacred. This is elevated. This is inspired. And you wanted to connect to this and make it part of your life. The Rebbe constantly emphasized that at the end of the day, light dispels darkness. I'm going to let you in on a secret, and you may not believe me, but it's true. For all the rancor and cynicism out there, there is so much good in the world. There's more good than bad. There's more light than darkness. There's more truth than lies. Unfortunately, it's the negativity that gets all the play and all the attention, and that's all you're going to hear about if you open the news. But the reality of life and the reality of the world, there is so much goodness amongst people. Remember just a year ago, the horrific storms that descended upon various areas of Texas and Houston, the state of Florida and Puerto Rico. Do you remember how people came together and were there to risk their lives to help one another? How humanity came together. Remember there was a football player, J.J. Watt, who decided he wanted to raise some money for the victims of the hurricane. And he set one of those pages up. His goal was to raise $200,000 to help the victims. He surpassed the $200 within an hour. He ended up raising $33 million. This is the goodness of man. It doesn't get the attention. We're more interested in what's negative about people and how people are ripping each other apart. The United States of America is a great country. It has its faults, many of them to be sure. It has its dark points of history, which we're not proud of. But at its core, in its most basic principles and foundations, it is, as the Lubavitcher Rebbe, and as his predecessor, the Frierdiker Rebbe, the previous Rebbe described it, it's a Medina shel Chesed. It's a country of kindness. It's a country of compassion. The Rebbe would often address the ills of American society, not for the sake of criticizing it, but for the sake of improving it, for the sake of elevating it, because he believed that the American people, as a rule, are inherently good and would be receptive to such improvement. There is evil and there is darkness, but the forces of goodness and light are so much stronger. The former may have its time, but the latter will always triumph in the end, always. There may be pain and loss along the way. There may be bad stuff that we have to suffer through in between, but ultimately, the enlightened who sees the better angels of humanity carry the day. The explainers will prevail. The optimists will prevail. The joyful and the grateful will always laugh last and laugh best. I'd like to close with the following story. It's a story that was told to us at the JLI retreat last summer by the former chief rabbi of Israel, Rabbi Yisrael Meir Lau. He told the story how in 1973 he served as a chaplain at the Ichilov Hospital in Tel Aviv. When the Yom Kippur War broke out, it was decided to have all the civilian patients of this hospital transferred to other hospitals. This hospital will be designated exclusively for the treatment of soldiers wounded in the field of battle. With many of the injuries having been sustained in tank battles, many of the soldiers suffered terrible burns over large parts of their bodies. Many were in critical condition. Many were in excruciating pain. Rabbi Lau described how gut-wrenching and heartbreaking it was for him to go from room to room visiting with these burned and wounded warriors, many of whom were letting out these blood-curdling screams of sheer agony. One day, as he was making his round from room to room visiting wounded soldiers, he heard a curious sound echoing through the halls of the hospital. It was the sound of someone singing with a beautiful voice. And he was intrigued. So he traced the source of the singing voice. It brought him to a room where he found that the singer was a patient, a soldier, whose eyes were completely covered with bandages as he lay there singing this beautiful song, a song about his home facing the Golan Heights. Looking at the soldier, he didn't see any burns on his body, so he asked the attending nurse, "What's this man's condition?" She explained that he had been badly injured during a battle in the Sinai. And although he didn't suffer any burns, he was hit by lots of flying shrapnel, some of which went into his eyes. But he has this incredible spirit about him. He doesn't stop singing. Ever since they brought him in last night, he hasn't stopped singing. Maybe it's his coping mechanism, but he's lifting everyone's spirits. As Rabbi Lau clutched the soldier's hand and shared with words of strength and inspiration, the soldier reciprocated in kind, saying how proud he was and how privileged he felt to have fought in defense of his beloved homeland. Looking up, Rabbi Lau noticed that the young man's parents were in the room. They were crying. They weren't singing. Rabbi Lau was told that the brave soldier was about to be brought in for surgery to see if anything could be done to save his eyes. He stayed with the family throughout the time of the operation, during which time he learned that they were from a very poor, tight-knit community of hundreds of Moroccan Jews living in the West Galilee. After several hours, the surgeon came out with a forlorn expression on his face. "I'm sorry," he said. "We were able to get the shrapnel out, but we couldn't save his sight. I'm afraid your son is going to be blind for the rest of his life." You can only imagine how devastated the parents were. Such a sweet, young, joyful man, sightless for the rest of his days. Not wanting to raise any false hopes, the surgeon then casually mentioned that he's aware of a surgeon in the United States who developed a certain procedure. It's an experimental procedure. But maybe he can do something. And they were forewarned this is a very new, highly experimental procedure, so they shouldn't put much stock in it. Nevertheless, he said, if you'd like, I'll send this doctor the full medical report and all the scans and see what he says. A few weeks later, this was pre-email days, they heard back from the doctor in America. This doctor, by the way, was not Jewish. He told them that as far as one of the eyes was concerned, there was nothing that could be done. That eye would never have vision again. But on the second eye, he said, there was a chance, a small chance, that he can restore possibly up to 30% of vision in that second eye. No guarantees, small chance, experimental, only 30%. If they wanted to go ahead with it, the doctor said, he would waive all of his fees. He wouldn't charge the family a penny. But they would have to arrange transportation from Israel, and they would have to pay the hospital and the hospital staff. That's something that they would have to take care of. But he, the doctor himself, would not take anything. After doing all the calculations, they realized that to take the doctor up on his good offer would cost the family $150,000 American dollars. When word got back to this young soldiers' community in the Galil, this entire village of poverty-stricken Moroccan Jews band together. They emptied out everything they had down to their last hard-earned shekel. And they raised $150,000 to get this boy on a plane to America. This is not someone else's child, they said. Ze yeled shalanu. This is our boy. This is our child. Any chance, even a small chance, of restoring any part of our child's vision must be pursued. The parents and the young soldier were flown to the United States. They met this kind, pioneering doctor, the surgeon. The surgery, a procedure of many hours, was performed. And then in the recovery room, it was time for the moment of truth. The doctor was again careful to reiterate the reality of the circumstances. This was highly uncertain. I cannot say what's going to be. We all knew the risks going in. At this point, all I can do is pray for the best. The parents nodded their understanding. With the soldier's father standing on the right side of the bed, with his mother standing on the left side of the bed, the doctor proceeded to slowly remove the bandage from his eyes. Once the bandage was removed, the soldier squinted slightly. He turns to the right, squints again, and says, Abba, Abba. and turns to the left. Ima, Ima, can you see? I see you. True to the doctor's best speculation, the young man had gained 30% of vision in one eye. It wasn't long before he started singing again. The family returned home to the joy of a loving community. A few months later, the American doctor had performed this miraculous feat called the family in Israel. He told them that he was going to be traveling to Japan for a conference, and being that he's never been to Israel before, he thought maybe he would make a brief stopover in Israel and check in on his patient. The family was delighted. That would be great. We'd love to see you. In fact, give us your flight information. We'll pick you up at the airport. The day of the doctor's arrival in Tel Aviv, he deplaned. He walks into the terminal where he was greeted by this most incredible sight. Thousands of Jews from the Galil, an entire mob, the entire community was standing there in the terminal cheering for him, holding signs proclaiming Todah, thank you. God bless you for what you did for our boy. We love you, doctor. Welcome to Israel. Our home is your home. This huge reception inch forward, everyone wanting a chance to shake his hand, to hug him. They lifted him on their shoulders. They danced with him in the terminal in Israel. Rabbi Lau shared that he was there at the celebration in the airport terminal that day, and he said it was the most amazing, moving scenes that he's ever seen, of such love and such gratitude that he's ever witnessed. As for the doctor, he was beyond overwhelmed, if not slightly embarrassed, as tears came to his eyes. As Rabbi Lau completed this story a year ago, he proceeded with this point. All of this euphoria, for what? For the restoration of 30% of vision in one eye. Every morning, you and I wake up to 100% vision in both eyes. How grateful ought we be to the one who restored it for us overnight. How grateful should we be for all the blessings and goodness in our lives. So let's discard the negative messages we're so exposed to, and let's focus on the blessings, the joy, the heroes, the miracles, the gratitude that we should have to express to God for all that He has given us. Thank you very much.